Thoughts on Daniel 1, from my morning devotions, September 2022. Daniel 1 verses 1 to 2. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim king of Judah came Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim king of Judah into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. The book of Daniel begins with the siege of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, during the 3rd reign of King Jehoiakim. He came and laid a siege on it, and God permitted him to take away some of the vessels of his temple, to carry them as a trophy to the house of his false god in the land of Shinar. This act was a signal from Nebuchadnezzar and his people, that their God was more powerful than the God of Israel. The vessels would be a reminder of their victory over Israel, and of the power of their God. Why would God allow this, knowing full well what it implied to the Babylonians? Why would he allow an act which would make him, the only true God, seem weak in the sight of men, and which would in turn make a false, non-existent God, seem more powerful than he is? Firstly, because God is not unstable in himself. He knows who he is and does not rely on appearances nor the outcomes between human tensions to measure or reflect his value, worth, or power. He knows that he is the only true God and that all others are false regardless of what his enemies or his own people believe about him. Yes, the honor of his name might be diminished in the sight of his enemies as a result of his allowing them to conquer his people, but it does not in any way change the ultimate reality of who he is. It only shows that God cares more about being recognized for whom he is through his own self-disclosure and to be honored accordingly through a willing obedience, than being perceived for what we think he is through our own human perception. He values the recognition of his character more than he values his reputation. Character, of course, is what someone intrinsically is or the qualities that make them who they are. Reputation, on the other hand, is what others think someone is. And while someone's reputation is often informed by their character, it can also be informed by misleading or untrue information perpetrated by others concerning them. Secondly, God is just. While he desires to reveal himself to people who don't know him, through his own people, he can only do it through the obedience, loyalty, and right relation of his people to himself. And when his people become disobedient and disloyal, and adopt the lifestyles of those whom he seeks to reveal himself to through them, his justice demands that he allow his people to suffer the consequences of their actions. And in so doing, not only does he show those who don't know him that he is just and has no favorites, but that sin is just as evil and destructive in his own people as in others and will receive due punishment in his people as in others. He would show the non-believers that his people are his people through righteousness alone, and that his relationship with them can only be sustained through their maintenance of the principles of righteousness through the obedience of faith, and that they too, the non-believers, can become his people by adopting the same. In summation of this second point, God reveals himself to non-believers through his people, by a relationship of loyalty, faithfulness, and purity, God showing his people mercy and showering them with spiritual and many times temporal blessings in the sight of non-believers, and his people showing gratitude and thanksgiving, rendering due obedience, loyalty, and maintaining purity. He also reveals himself to non-believers apart from his people, by allowing his people, when disloyal, disobedient, and impure, to suffer the consequences of their actions, thus demonstrating his justice and hatred of sin. He has a way of enabling non-believers to distinguish between his people and himself, of perceiving that it is due to the unfaithfulness of his people to himself that they are conquered by their enemies, rather than it being due to God being weak or having abandoned them. Thirdly, God knew that through a few, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, he was about to reveal his true character and power to Nebuchadnezzar and his people, that although he could not at that time do it through his people as a whole due to their disloyalty to him, and as a result had appeared weak to the Babylonians in allowing them to conquer his people and take them captive, he would yet restore the true perception of himself to the Babylonians through the loyalty and purity of these 4 young men. It is our privilege, as God's people, as a whole, to represent God to others. Yet, it is only a privilege, for God can do it apart from us. He can do it by many or by few. And as evidenced by biblical history, he has never lacked, even during times of widespread apostasy among his people, a few loyal human agents to represent him to others. Verse 2.